120 injuries, 35 hotels burned to the ground, over 100,000 protesters on the streets of Northern Ireland. For 3 nights, the Union Jack has not flown in the wind. It has glowed in flames. At 8:30 p.m. on November 5th, 2025, the capital of Northern Ireland officially descended into a state of kinetic anarchy. Belfast city centre. Police sirens bleed through the rain, shop fronts splinter under the weight of flying bricks, bottles arc through the air like mortars. What began as a march for answers has erupted into Britain's largest civil disturbance in more than a decade. The targets are deliberate, precise. Hotels housing the phantom population, now fixed in the public imagination as symbols of a government that built compassion through lucrative contracts while the native population froze. Footage captures lines of riot shields braced outside the High Street Hotel in Belfast. Once a shelter for 230 asylum seekers, it is now swallowed by orange heat and choking smoke. Local firefighters report 19 separate arson attacks within just 24 hours. Derry, Lisburn, Ballina, each name now reduced to a headline of destruction. A man shouts toward the cameras, his voice cutting through the black smoke. "You promised security. You gave us silence." This is not just a riot, it is a rebellion against the political class that has abandoned its primary duty. Do you blame the government's silence for this chaos? Comment "resign" below right now. Tell Star that his refusal to address the crisis is fueling the fire. Make your voice heard before they censor this video. Across the United Kingdom, more than 100,000 people have taken to the streets. Belfast, London, Derry, and Trim, even Newcastle and County Down, all chanting the same line. Where is Westminster? The government has not yet answered. Inside the Commons, lights burn late, but words come slowly. The Home Secretary calls the violence contained unrest. The opposition calls it total collapse. Prime Minister Karma is scheduled to address the nation at dawn. But for millions of Britons watching their screens tonight, dawn feels like an alibi, not a solution. Police came under attack during a 5th night of riots in Northern Ireland. On Sky News, anchors read casualty numbers like clock ticks: 114 injured, 27 police officers hospitalized, 37 hotels damaged, 68 million in property losses. Economists warned that if the riots spread to mainland ports, logistics routes to Liverpool and Glasgow could seize within 48 hours. At 9 p.m., an encrypted memo leaked from the Home Office. It read, "Northern Command overstretched. Reserve units requested. Political approval pending." That approval never came. The police on the ground were left to hold the line without reinforcement. At the edge of the crowd, a young nurse named Sophie Mallister holds up her phone, live streaming the chaos. "This is my street," she says quietly. "My rent went up 41% this year, and they tell me there is no funding left. But there is funding for this." Her video racked up 3.2 million views in 6 hours. If you're watching this now, you have seen the footage too. What you are seeing isn't just protest, it is exhaustion. At 10:30 p.m., the first wave hits the security cordon on Parliament grounds. Barricades collapse instantly. Police deployed tear gas for the first time since 2013. Reporters in London describe the sound as a heartbeat of panic. Downing Street releases a 3-sentence statement. The Prime Minister condemns violence. Public safety remains our priority. Dialogue must continue. But dialogue ended the moment the first hotel fell behind closed doors. The intelligence briefings are grim. MI5's regional desk identifies 52 online channels coordinating real-time crowd movements, encrypted, shifting by the minute. Police drones are jammed twice. Cellular towers burn under a rain of ash. An internal line from the Cabinet Office reads, "Containment impossible. Public mood volatile." At 11 p.m., energy traders flag anomalies. Oil depots in Belfast and Larne report attempted blockades. By midnight, fuel distribution across Northern Ireland has dropped by 20%. Hospitals switch to backup generators. And still, Westminster sleeps, at least on social media. One phrase trends above all of others: Britain on fire. Within 12 hours, it reaches 64 million impressions, eclipsing even the general election. Clips of riot officers kneeling before crowds go viral, captioned with lines like, "We serve the people, not the politicians." By dawn, the question is no longer who started the fire, but who benefits from the smoke. In the morning briefing, a senior advisor warns, if we call it terrorism, we criminalize half the country. If we don't, we lose control of the rest. The Prime Minister says nothing. Cabinet sources say he looks pale, eyes locked on a screen showing Belfast in flames. Meanwhile, analysts report an 8% drop in consumer confidence, £1.2 billion wiped from retail markets, a 46% surge in flight bookings from Belfast to Dublin. When citizens begin fleeing their own country, if only for a weekend of peace, you know these numbers are more than statistics. They are a diagnosis of a failed state. In Lisburn, a crowd of thousands forms around the ruins of the King's Crown Hotel. The building had hosted 112 migrants funded by the Home Office at a rate of £189 per head per night. That contract was worth £7.8 million a year. Now, it is ash. An elderly veteran named Thomas Reed walks past the debris with a flag over his shoulders. "I fought for this country," he tells reporters, "but I don't recognize it anymore." The clip rounds on every network by evening. Commentators call it the moment Britain saw its reflection. This is the reality of a nation pushed beyond its breaking point. The hotels are burning, not because of hate, but because they represent the only thing the government seems to care about. And as the smoke clears over Belfast, the rest of the UK realizes something terrifying. The fire is spreading. At 12 a.m. on November 6th, the Prime Minister finally emerged. Keir Starmer stepped to the podium in Westminster and read from a single sheet of paper titled National Stability Address. His voice was calm. His words were empty. He condemned the violence in Northern Ireland. He reaffirmed a commitment to unity, but there was no mention of the migrant hotel contracts worth £7.8 million. No reference to the ignored MI5 warnings, only the steady rhythm of political tranquilizers designed to lull a furious nation back to sleep. Reporters shouted questions from the floor. Will you suspend the asylum hotel program? Will you visit Belfast and see the ashes yourself? He didn't answer. He simply turned away. The broadcast ended in silence. Outside the walls of Westminster, the noise was still growing. For millions of Britons, this was the moment the illusion shattered. They realized the man in charge was not managing the crisis, he was hiding from it. The government pleads poverty when it comes to your rent or your heating bill, yet it somehow finds millions to house unvetted arrivals in the very hotels now reduced to cinders. The mainstream media is terrified to connect these dots. They want you to believe this is nothing more than mindless thuggery, not a reaction to systemic betrayal. They want this channel shut down because we talk about the contracts they work so hard to bury. The only way to beat their algorithm and keep seeing the uncensored truth is to subscribe to this channel right now. Do not let them silence us. By nightfall, the numbers become unreal. 142 injured, 53 arrested. Protests erupt in response to the alleged sexual assault of a 10-year-old Irish child by a man of African origin. $91 million in damage recorded in a single 48-hour window. Emergency rooms begin to overflow. But the most dangerous statistic wasn't the property damage. It was the psychological collapse of the state's enforcers. Police morale dropped by 29% overnight. Officers are exhausted, outnumbered, and led by a political class that despises them. Public trust in the government plunged to 22%, a record low in modern history. The foreign press has already labeled it the Starmer collapse. In Brussels, one diplomat said off the record, "Britain used to export stability, now it exports chaos." As midnight returns to Belfast, rain begins to fall on the charred streets. The sirens have faded, replaced by the low hum of a city trying to breathe. We're here outside the City West Asylum Hub in Saggart, Dublin, where a massive crowd has gathered, at least 2,000 to 3,000 people from what I can see. Civilians sweep the pavement, collecting glass and ash into buckets. Someone hangs a handwritten sign over a burned-out door. It reads, "Home once, hope again." From Ballymena to Belfast, from Lisburn to Londonderry, every image tells the same story. A government out of touch, a nation out of patience, and a people who refuse to stay silent. The Prime Minister built his tenure on one promise: stability. But tonight, that stability looks like a smoking ruin. The collapse didn't happen because the police ran out of shields. It happened because the public ran out of. When a government values its international reputation more than its domestic peace, it doesn't get order, it gets anarchy. So Britain? What happens next? Is this a riot or a reckoning? The government wants you to believe this is hate. They want you to believe the people of Northern Ireland have turned into monsters. But beneath the smoke and sirens, there is something else. Something the BBC cameras missed because they were too busy filming the fire. In the back streets of Belfast, strangers who stood on opposite sides just hours earlier are now passing blankets through broken windows. A young migrant woman, still trembling from the blaze that consumed her shelter, is seen helping an elderly local man lift his fallen shop sign back into place. No cameras, no slogans, no orders from Westminster. Just people doing what governments forgot how to do: care. At a small church near Donegal Square, volunteers light candles for the injured. Catholic, Protestant, immigrant, and local. Each flame small, stubborn, and equal. The city, for all its pain, still remembers how to hold itself together when no one else will. A teacher named Eileen writes on the wall of a burned hotel, "Forgiveness builds what fury burns." Within hours, her words spread across social feeds, shared more than any riot clip. Because deep down, even in the roar of collapse, people recognize what truly matters. Not who we blame, but what we become after. The British people are not the enemy. The enemy is the silence at the top that pitted neighbor against neighbor. But we must not be naive. This moment of unity in the ashes does not erase the danger we face. They view your demand for safety as populism and your demand for borders as hate. To them, the events in Belfast are not a tragedy. They are a stress test. They are watching to see how much you will tolerate before you break. The Prime Minister's refusal to visit Belfast is not cowardice, it is contempt, a signal that the provinces do not matter to the metropolitan elite. They are willing to let the hotels burn, so long as the stock market in London remains stable. I utterly condemn the violence that we've seen overnight in Ballymena and in other parts of Northern Ireland, including against PSNI officers. The words were spoken, but the meaning was clear. They have miscalculated. The sleepless night endured by Belfast is only a fraction of the nightmare lived by families who have been ignored for years. And by morning, the cost of the government's negligence was no longer measured only in burned vehicles, but in freezing homes across working-class neighborhoods. While pensioners in surrounding boroughs were forced to choose between heating and eating, news outlets circulated the daily cost of the hotel contracts, millions per day, every day, while the veteran on the street received nothing. For the third night in a row, Ballymena burned. Police officers came under attack with bottles, bricks, and fireworks. In response, this economic insult became the fuel for the fire. When a government proves it cannot distinguish between a citizen and a tourist, it forfeits the moral authority to command the streets. The chaos was inevitable because the betrayal was absolute. The men who threw the bricks were wrong to destroy their own city. But the government that lit the fuse by ignoring its people is guilty of something far worse. Britain is a nation born from Reconstruction, rubble to roof, war to welfare, silence to song. And yet tonight, staff were forced to barricade themselves inside buildings, then flee through back doors to escape the disorder. The unrest first ignited on Monday after a peaceful protest over an alleged sexual assault. Maybe tonight's fire is not the end of something, but the beginning of a question we have ignored for far too long. How much anger does it take to remember empathy? And how much failure does it take to demand a new system? The flames will die out, the buildings will rise again, but the lesson written in the smoke over Belfast will remain. Strength is not control, it is the compassion that survives chaos. The government has failed. The police are paralyzed, but the people, the nurse filming the disorder, the veteran walking through the ash, the teacher writing on the wall, they are still standing. This is the final warning. If Westminster does not wake up to the reality of what happened in Belfast, the next fire will not be contained. It will not be an isolated incident in a hotel. It will be the end of the United Kingdom as a functional state. The windows of Buckingham Palace remain closed. The Prime Minister remains hidden, but the eyes of the country are wide open. The Belfast riots were meant to be a weekend of disorder. Instead, they became the beginning of a national reckoning. The fires may be extinguished by morning, but trust in the institutions has already turned to ash. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next update.